For a broad meaning of gross rate is the exchange rate between the two types of currency computed by reference to a third currency. Okay, so third currency mean so any currency. But in the narrow meaning, the gross rate is the exchange rate between the two types of currency computed by a reference to USD. So usually we focus on the narrow meaning of the gross rate. So we need three cases of gross rate. In the case one, USD plays the role as commodity currency in both of the exchange rates. In case two, USD play the role as commodity in one exchange rate, but the term currency in another. In the third case, USD plays the role as the term currency in both of the exchange rate. So now we go to each case. In the first one, suppose that in the market, so we have the exchange rate, the information on the exchange rate of the USD against VND, A and B. A is the bid rate and B is the offer rate, the op rate. For the USD against dollar Singapore, we have the C is for the bid rate and D for the offer rate. And in in the first case, USD is a commodity currency in both exchange rate. So now our purpose is to compute the exchange rate of dollar Singapore against VND. So let's denote X is the bid rate and Y is the offer rate. So how to compute the gross rate? So we have the two methods. The first one is the fast calculation. So in here, we can derive the exchange rate of dollar Singapore against VND by taking USD against VND divided by USD against dollar Singapore. And because we know that the bid rate is always less than the offer rate, right? So we compute or we calculate X at a mean of a ratio between these two exchange rates. The X or the bid rate is the mean. Meanwhile, the offer rate or Y is the max of a ratio between these two exchange rates. For X, when we compute the bid rate of the dollar Singapore against VND, we need the mean value of a ratio, and in the numerator, we have the exchange rate of USD against VND. So in here, so you see the line, the spotlight. Okay, to compute X, we need the mean of ratio. In the numerator, we have the exchange rate of USD and VND. And in the denominator, we have the exchange rate of the USD against dollar Singapore. And in order to obtain the mean value, so for a ratio, so we need a mean value of the USD against VND. And in the denominator, we need a max, okay, a max value. And when we link to the exchange rate, so in the numerator, we have the bid rate of the USD against VND. And in the denominator, we have the offer rate of the USD against dollar Singapore. And that's the way. And finally, we have X is equal to A divided by D. That's the way we obtain the X, or the bid rate of the dollar Singapore against VND. And when we come to the Y, the offer rate, how to compute the offer rate? Okay, we need the max value and apply the same logic we have to get the max. So it means that for a ratio, we have the max value in the numerator and the mean value in the denominator. And in this exchange rate, the max value mean we have the offer rate, okay, because the offer rate is always higher than the bid rate. Okay, in the denominator, we have the mean value of the USD against dollar Singapore. So we have the bid rate, okay. So when we have the offer rate divided by the bid rate, okay, so we have the max value. And finally, we have the Y is equal to B divided by C. That's the way we do when we compute the gross rate for the case 1. USD placed USD is the commodity currency in both exchange rate. That is the fast calculation. And another method, okay. Another method, we apply a table method. And when we for the table method, it gives us the intuition behind the fast calculation. Okay, in order to understand why we come to the previous approach, we come x equal to a divided by d and y equal to b divided by c. Why is that? So we use the table method to obtain the logic behind that. Okay, for the table method, first to compute x, remember that x is the bit rate of the dollar Singapore against VND, right? Vietnamese đồng. And in the exchange rate dollar Singapore against Vietnamese đồng, dollar Singapore is the commodity currency, while Vietnam đồng is the term currency. Okay, in order to compute x, so we view a table where that has 3 columns. The first column is the client transaction. The second column is the bank transaction, and the third column is the exchange rate information, or the exchange rate applied to the transaction. And in order to compute x, we start with the currency the client holds in hand, that is the commodity currency. Okay, we start when the client holds commodity currency in hand, the dollar Singapore. So what should the client do? The client will sell the dollar Singapore to the bank, okay? And the bank will buy the dollar Singapore, and in turn, the bank will pay to the client the USD, okay? Because on the market, we have the exchange rate of the USD against dollar Singapore, right? So in the exchange rate of USD against the dollar Singapore, USD is the commodity currency, dollar Singapore is the term currency. So which exchange rate apply here? So because the bank quotes the exchange rate, right? And in the first transaction, the bank sell the commodity currency. So we apply the offer rate of the exchange rate of the USD against dollar Singapore. So in the first transaction, 1 USD is equal to D SDD. Okay, that's it. That's finish the first transaction. In the second transaction, the client holds the USD in hand, right? Then the client will sell the USD to the bank, okay? And in return, the bank will pay the VND, okay? Because in the exchange rate of the USD against Vietnamese đồng, USD is the commodity currency, VND is the term currency, and in this transaction, the bank buys the commodity currency. The bank buys commodity currency, so we apply, or the bank will apply the bid rate in the exchange rate of USD against VND. And in here, 1 USD equals a VND, and finally, the client holds VND in hand. So we have the information of 1 USD with G dollar Singapore, 1 USD equal to a VND, right? And put them together, so you can withdraw 1 SGD equal to A divided by D VND. So that comes to the final result. Okay, so that's the way we apply the table method to understand the logics behind the cross rate, how to compute the cross rate. Okay, that's for the bit rate. For the offer rate, why? How to compute the offer rate? Okay, so for the offer rate, the client holds the term currency in hand. Okay, the client start with some amount of the VND. Let's start. The client holds 1 VND in hand. Okay, what should the client do? The client will sell the VND to the bank in order to get the USD, okay? Because on the market, we only have the exchange rate information of USD against VND, okay? The client sell the VND, and in turn, the bank buy the VND and they pay to the client the USD. In other words, the bank will sell the USD, and because in the exchange rate of the USD against VND, USD is the commodity currency, VND is the term currency, okay? So in this transaction, the bank sells the commodity currency, so we apply the offer rate in the exchange rate of the USD against VND. Okay, so after the first transaction, the client holds USD in hand. Okay, and in the next transaction, the client will sell the USD to the bank. Okay, in return, the bank will pay to the client the dollar Singapore, the SGD. And in this transaction, in this exchange rate, USD is the commodity currency, dollar Singapore is the term currency. So the client sells the commodity currency. In other words, the bank will buy the commodity currency, so the bank will apply or will pay the exchange, the bid rate, okay? Because the bank buys the commodity currency, so the bank will apply the bid rate. So we have the 1 USD equals C SGD, and finally, the client holds SGD in hand, and we have the exchange rate 1 USD equal to B VND, and also 1 USD equals to C SGD. Put them together, we have the 1 SGD equal to B divided by C VND. So that's the way we compute the offer rate for the first case. Okay, Are you with me?
No.
No? Feel confused?
Yeah. I
Okay.
can still start with the bit rate and up to now for the operators on certain fields.
Okay. Let's start from here. Okay. So in the case one, we have the USD is the commodity currency. Okay. And we have the information of the USD against VND and USD against SGD. And now we need to compute the exchange rate of the SGD against VND. And in the third exchange rate, the gross exchange rate here, SGD is a commodity, right? And VND is a term currency, okay? Okay. And what is X? What is X? X is the bit rate. It's the bit rate of the SGD against the VND. The bit rate, what is the bit rate? The bit rate is the exchange rate that the quoting bank will buy the commodity currency, right? The bit rate is the rate the quoting bank will buy the commodity currency, okay? And in this exchange rate, in the exchange rate of the SGD against VND, SGD is the commodity currency. SGD is the commodity currency. So X is the rate at which the quoting bank buy the SGD. The SGD. Okay? So for the to compute the bit rate as we just mentioned is the rate at which the quoting bank buys the commodity currency. Okay, so when the bank buys the commodity currency, it means that the client or the customer holds the commodity currency in hand, right? And the client will sell the commodity currency to the bank, okay? Okay, and now we see how to compute the X because we have not yet know the information of the cross rate. So when the client sells the commodity currency in here, the dollar Singapore to the bank, okay, because the exchange rate of the dollar Singapore against Vietnam Miss Dong are not available, okay? So we need to transfer through the USD, okay? We need to indirectly transact through the USD. And one, we know that to compute X, so at the first step, the client holds the commodity currency in hand, okay? So then we apply the transaction through the USD. At the first transaction, because the client holds the SGD in hand, so the client will sell the SGD to the bank, okay? Because the SGD against VND is not available, so we need to transact through the USD, okay? When the client sell the SGD to the bank, so in return, the bank will pay to the client the USD, okay? In other words, the bank will sell the USD to the client. And because in the exchange rate of the USD against SGD, USD is a commodity currency, okay? And in this transaction, the bank sells the commodity currency, so we apply the offer rate in the exchange rate of the USD against dollar Singapore, okay? After finishing the first step, okay, the client will hold the USD in hand, and then they sell USD, the commodity currency, to the bank, okay, in order to obtain the VND, okay. So in this transaction, USD is the commodity currency in the exchange rate of the USD against VND, and the client sell the USD. In other words, the bank will buy the commodity currency, okay? Client sell the commodity currency, but the bank will buy the commodity currency. So we apply the bit rate here. So you should understand, so in exchange rate, we have the two-way quotation. The initial rate is the bid rate. The latter rate is the offer rate. And the bid rate is the rate at which the quoting bank buys the commodity currency. The offer rate is the rate at which the quoting bank sells the commodity currency, okay? You should always remember that to understand the direction of the transaction here. Okay, it's clear now? Now you apply the table method to answer the second case, okay? In the second case, USD is commodity currency in one exchange rate and term currency in another, okay? So, for example, in here, USD VND, GBP USD, okay? And we need to compute the cross rate of the GBP against VND. First, so we have the two methods, the fast calculation and the table method, okay? So I think for the fast calculation is simple. Please apply the table method. Please apply the table method. And now we work in group. Because you don't rename your name, so I will assign you in two group randomly. We have 5 minutes to discuss with your friend how to apply the table method to derive the cross rate in the case 2. Okay? We have 5 minutes. Okay, let's start now. You have 5 minutes.
What the fuck, bro? What the fuck?
What the fuck?
Đi comment, bro.
What the fuck? What the fuck?
What the fuck? What the fuck?
What the fuck?
What the fuck?
What the fuck? Quay chẳng được. What the fuck?